Here we go, Chapter 12, Tree Risk Assessment. Let's jump right in. Trees in urban areas do more than just look nice. They provide shade, improve air quality, and enhance property values. As trees age and grow larger, their benefits increase, but so can the risks. Older trees may develop decay or shed limbs, which can pose hazards. That's where tree risk assessment comes in. So what is tree risk assessment? Tree risk assessment is a structured process arborists use to identify and evaluate tree hazards. The focus is usually on structural failure, things like falling limbs or the tree itself uprooting. The goal is to keep people safe and protect property while also promoting long-term tree health. When we talk about risk, we're really talking about two things: how likely an event is to happen and how severe the consequences would be if it does. In tree care, the biggest risk comes from structural issues, branches breaking or trees falling, for example. Arborists assess risk to keep the public safe, protect workers, and help tree owners make informed decisions. When done well, a risk assessment can help preserve trees by identifying and managing risks early, rather than just removing the trees unnecessarily. There are a few different systems arborists use to assess risk, but they all involve identifying hazards, analyzing conditions, and evaluating the consequences. A common method is TRAQ, Tree Risk Assessment Qualification, which is offered by the ISA. This is a really great course if you want to learn more about tree risk assessment. Regardless of the method you use, arborists must always consider the uncertainty in predicting natural processes. There are 4 key ideas behind risk assessment. 1. All trees have some level of risk. 2. All trees also provide benefits. 3. In many cases, the benefits outweigh the risks. And number 4, the only way to eliminate all risk is to eliminate all trees, which isn't an option in most cases. So we work to balance safety with the value of trees. And that balance is really important. Trees offer environmental, social, and economic value. If we want to keep enjoying these benefits, we have to accept manageable level of risk and manage it appropriately. And there are 3 main levels of tree risk assessment. Level 1 is a limited visual assessment, Level 2 is basic, and Level 3 is advanced. Each level uses different methods, tools, and levels of detail depending on the situation and the client's needs. The first one, Level 1, is the quickest type of assessment. Basically, it's a visual check from one side. It's useful for identifying obvious defects in large number of trees. These assessments might be done while we're walking by, driving by, or using aerial patrols, or even LiDAR technology. The downside, many defects are hidden from view, so it's limited in accuracy. Level 2 is the most commonly used. It's a full visual inspection of the tree and the surrounding site. The arborist looks at all the sides of the tree and may use simple tools like binoculars or a mallet. This level gives more reliable information but can still miss internal or below-ground issues. And if even more detail is needed, a Level 3 assessment is performed. This might include decay testing, root excavation, or using tools like sonic tomography or resistance drilling. These assessments take more time and resources, but they help us make more confident decisions about high-risk trees. One key part of risk assessment is figuring out whether a tree or a limb, if it falls, is likely to hit something. We consider how likely it is to fall and whether it would hit a target or like a building, car, or person. The direction of fall, tree height, and site slope all factor into this. Targets are people, property, or activities that could be harmed. People are the top priority, even if they're not there at the moment. Trees near sidewalks, buildings, and electric lines are examples where potential targets are common. The target zone is the area a tree or a branch might fall if it hits. We also look at occupancy rate. How often people or vehicles are in that zone? A busy sidewalk has a higher occupancy rate than a backyard shed, for example. Now let's talk about the other half of the equation, likelihood of failure. This is based on visible defects, structural issues, and loads like wind. The bigger the defects and the more exposure to forces, the more likely a failure becomes. We also have to define a time frame, usually 1 to 3 years. This gives context to the likelihood rating. Predicting tree failure over longer time frames becomes too uncertain. so we avoid going beyond 5 years. And a large part of our job as arborists is communicating risk clearly. That means explaining what we know, what we don't know, and what we recommend based on the available information. Tree owners need to understand the limitations and confidence level of our assessments. Some structural defects are more likely to lead to tree failure than others are. While a single defect might not be a serious concern on its own, multiple defects can work together to increase the risk, especially when additional forces like wind or weight are added. However, trees do have the ability to respond to weakness through what we call response growth, strengthening areas under stress. When we visually assess a tree, we look at both the defects and the presence of response growth to judge how likely failure will be. And when you're performing a visual assessment, we're not just looking for defects, we're looking at how they interact. A single crack might be tolerable, but combine that with decay, lean, or load, and the risk increases. We also look for signs that the tree is trying to compensate, such as callus tissue or adaptive growth. These signs can tell us if the tree is structurally reinforcing weak points or becoming more vulnerable. Site conditions play a major role in both the likelihood and the consequences of failure. Significant site changes like clearing forests, digging trenches, altering soil levels, or changing groundwater can affect root system and tree stability. When these changes happen suddenly, trees may not have time or the resources to adjust, increasing the likelihood of failure. And trees adapt pretty slowly to the environment over time. When a stable setting suddenly changes, trees can become compromised. A great example of this is a forest edge tree that was once protected but is now exposed to wind after nearby clearing. The tree's roots or canopy may not be ready for the new conditions, making failure more likely. Loads are forces acting on a tree. These include static loads like gravity and water weight, and dynamic loads, mainly wind. Most tree failures happen during storms, when wind or ice loads exceed the tree's strength. If a tree fails during normal wind conditions, it's often a sign of a serious underlying defect. But even defect trees can fail under extreme wind speeds. And when you're assessing a tree, you got to consider what's normal for the region. A palm in South Florida, for example, faces very different wind expectations than a spruce in the Rockies. If the combination of structural defect and the expected load is too much, risk increases dramatically. This is why evaluating both the load and the structure together is critical. Some tree species fail in predictable ways. Certain trees might be prone to limb drop, others to trunk splits or root plate failure. Using known failure profiles can help us anticipate problems. Also, site conditions can make a species more or less vulnerable. For example, a shallow-rooted species on wet soil is at higher risk. A healthy canopy doesn't always mean a stable tree. We've seen high-risk trees with dense green foliage because water and nutrients are still flowing. But root disease, decay, or other hidden issues can make the structure weak. On the flip side, a tree may look stressed or declining from foliar pests but still be structurally sound. And even if a tree is likely to fail, we must also ask, what happens if it does? That's where consequences come in. We look at the value of the target, whether it's a person, car, house, or a power line. Then how much harm failure might cause. This includes injury, property damage, or even service disruption. Several factors affect consequences. Part size matters. A falling limb the size of your arm doesn't carry the same risk as one the size of your torso. Fall distance matters too. Higher branches build up more momentum. We also consider the fall characteristics. Will it drop straight down or will it swing outward? And finally, protection factors like fences, roofs, walls, or even other trees. They can reduce damage but may not prevent it entirely. Unfortunately, predicting tree failure is not an exact science. Even with training, arborists are limited to how accurately they can predict failure. We look for characteristics linked to failure, but some aren't visible, like internal defects or root problems. Also, environmental forces like wind are unpredictable. Inspections need to be more than just a quick glance. They require effort and methodical approach. A visual assessment involves identifying and evaluating structural conditions, both on their own and together. Each condition affects failure risk differently. It's important to determine how each factor may interact with the others. Some defects may seem minor alone but could be dangerous in combination. Using a consistent process helps ensure we gather all the relevant information. We're not just looking at the tree, we're learning about its history and its site. Many assessors use forms to ensure they don't miss anything. This helps with accurate record keeping and analysis. What exactly is tree failure? Tree failure is when branches, stems, or roots break or lose support. It happens when the load on the tree exceeds the strength of its structure or supporting soil. Even healthy trees can fail under extreme conditions. Usually, failure results from both structural issues and loading events like wind. Dead trees or limbs are clear hazards, especially when a target is nearby. But not all dead branches are urgent concerns. Some species retain deadwood for years, so it's important to know the species and the local climate. Broken branches may still be attached or lodged in the canopy. These are known as hangers or widowmakers. Their risk depends on how they're held in place and whether they're decaying. They should always be monitored or removed when there's risk to people or property. Some branch arrangements naturally fail more often. Strong attachments form when branches and trunks can grow together gradually. Branches over half the size of the parent stem, or those that form after damage like adventitious branches, tend to be weaker. Decay near attachment points reduces strength even more. Codominant stems arise from the same point and are similar in size. They often lack a branch collar, which makes them structurally weaker. Included bark in the union further weakens the attachment. Response growth can help, but failure risk is usually higher. Cracks can occur along or across stems, branches, or roots. Some, like longitudinal cracks, often result from wind or snow loads. Transverse cracks are more serious. They suggest internal fibers are failing. Not all cracks mean failure is certain, but some definitely require closer investigation. And believe it or not, a leaning tree isn't always unstable. Trees may lean naturally toward light or away from competition. Remember we talked about phototropism and geotropism. But a lean that worsens over time or one with soil movement could signal root or stem failure. Corrected leans like sweeps may be stable but can still be vulnerable under heavy loads. Root damage affects stability significantly. Severe decayed or diseased roots reduce anchorage. Some issues like stem girdling roots or buried buttress roots develop over time. Often we infer root problems through site clues like cut roots near paving or crown decline in wet soils. Decay fungi break down wood and reduce structural strength. Decay may not be obvious, there may not be mushrooms or conchs, but when visible, fruiting bodies are a definite sign of internal decay. Decay can occur in different parts of the tree, affecting strength in different ways. White rot fungi like Armillaria and Ganoderma break down lignin. They make wood flexible but less stiff. Brown rot, more common in conifers, decays cellulose and makes wood brittle. Soft rot is similar to brown rot but harder to identify. White rot often allows more response growth than brown rot. Decay is named based on where it occurs. You got heartwood rot, basal rot, root rot, or sapwood rot. Sapwood rot is especially dangerous because it causes severe strength loss. Definite indicators include fruiting bodies, open cavities, and carpenter ants. Potential signs include cracks, seams, or nesting animals. Trees react to stress by growing new wood where it's needed. Compression and tension wood help balance loads from wind and gravity. Bulges or ribs may form around decay or cracks. Wound wood forms after cambial injury and is dense and resistant to decay. Sometimes we need advanced tools to assess hidden defects. Level 3 assessments offer more detail. These include aerial inspections, internal decay tests, and root excavation. They help us understand conditions we can't see from the ground. Aerial inspection allows us to examine the crown and the upper trunk. This can be done by climbing, drone, lift, or nearby buildings. It's useful for spotting defects not visible from the ground. We use two common tools to assess decay: resistance drills and sonic tomography. Resistance drills measure how easily a probe penetrates the wood. Decay shows up as areas with little resistance. Sonic tomography maps decay using sound wave travel times. It creates a 2D or 3D image showing the strength of different sections. To assess root and trunk conditions, arborists may need to expose the root collar using a process called root collar excavation. Since most roots are underground, damage or decay often goes unnoticed in surface inspections. We use high-pressured air excavation tools to remove soil safely. Hand tools can also be used with care to avoid harming the roots or trunk. Once the roots are exposed, we inspect them for signs of cutting, injury, decay, or response growth. This is also a chance to look for structural issues. If necessary, we may apply decay assessment techniques to determine the tree's condition more precisely. Alright, so after the inspection, we analyze the data to determine risk levels. We identify failure modes, where and how a tree might fail, and match them with potential targets. Each failure mode and target pair is analyzed as a separate risk. Some trees can have multiple failure scenarios, so we focus on the most significant ones for that location. And it's really important to clearly define each risk being rated. For example, we might evaluate the risk of a large dead branch striking a garage versus the entire tree falling and hitting a patio. These are two separate scenarios with different levels of risk. Every assessment should specify the exact condition and the time frame being considered. So once we've assessed all failure mode and target combinations, we report the one with the highest risk as the overall tree risk rating. This helps prioritize which trees or issues need attention first, especially when managing a large number of trees. Risk perception varies from person to person. What one client considers acceptable, another might find too risky. It's not possible to remove all risk from trees, so some level of acceptable risk must be defined by the owner, manager, or governing authority. Budget, aesthetics, and tree value also influence these decisions. Tree risk management involves applying procedures to identify, evaluate, and mitigate tree risks. The tree manager or owner sets the policies, defines acceptable risk levels, and decides how frequently to inspect. In many cases, arborists work with managers to define the scope and prioritize mitigation actions. Tree managers must also be aware of local laws or legal precedents regarding tree maintenance. For large organizations or municipalities, system-level risk management includes not just risk of harm, but also financial loss, liability, and operational disruption. Mitigation is the process of reducing risk. Strategies can focus on the tree, the target, or both. Arborists make recommendations, but the final decision lies with the owner or the manager. Multiple strategies may be combined to achieve acceptable levels of risk. We can reduce risk by managing targets. For example, movable items can be relocated, and access to hazardous areas can be restricted with signs or fencing. These approaches often preserve the tree while reducing the chance of harm. Pruning is a common mitigation method. We remove dead or weakly attached branches and can use reduction pruning to reduce wind resistance. Topping is discouraged because it causes long-term issues. Crown raising should be done carefully to avoid destabilizing the tree. Support systems like cables or braces help limit movement and weak limbs or unions. These are especially useful when tree removal isn't desirable. The hardware chosen depends on the tree structure and the intended outcome. And in some cases, we may even retain decaying trees as wildlife habitat if they don't pose a high risk. The key is to ensure the tree's height is less than the distance to any targets. We must also consider long-term management needs and wildlife value. After the highest risk factor is mitigated, the tree must be reevaluated. The next most significant risk becomes the newest priority. This layered approach ensures all serious issues are addressed over time if the tree is to be preserved. And to wrap up this chapter, residual risk is the risk that remains after mitigation. If the tree is removed and the stump is ground, the risk is zero. In many countries, the as low as reasonably practicable principle, or ALARP, is used to guide decisions, balancing cost and benefit. If the remaining risk is too high for the client's comfort, further action may be needed, but we must always consider what benefit would be lost if the tree were removed. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.